Didn't want to interrupt you.
No problem. So the IHRA definition emerged right around the year 2018. IHRA stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And what was it was a group of people from Canada, North America, Israel, and Europe who said we need a working definition of anti-Semitism. And interestingly enough, that working definition of anti-Semitism was inspired by Natan Sharansky's 3Ds, which we'll discuss later. But 3Ds are demonization, delegitimization, and double standards. And so the IRA definition has been has emerged and is really, a lot of institutions want to quote unquote adopt IRA. Let's put that aside for just a second. But what I'm trying to kind of paint a picture of is that, as you can see, policymakers, educators were working within a field of trying to understand anti-Semitism, and we were either telling our students anti-Semitism and the Holocaust are the same, therefore it ended in 1945, or we were universalizing the Holocaust. So I want to show you something. This is a project that was done in a day school, in a high school in Los Angeles. These students were given like as you can see, like it's almost like a sticker name tag. And they had this project, and it was called I Will Not Be Silent in the Face of. And they had to fill in what they would not be silent on. So as you can see, one student said, I will not be silent in the face of gun violence. Another person said sexism. Another put rape culture, homophobia, any hate, environmental degradation. I have a question for you if anybody wants to answer. What do you think they were taught that day where the outcome was this? What do you think was the lesson that day, if you had to guess? Right, this is kind of a backward design question. We have the student's assessment. This is an informal assessment right here. Whatever they heard that day in an assembly or in a classroom, this is the product. What do you think that they were taught that day? Anybody can answer this question. Is it?
Anti-Semitism.
You think they were taught about anti-Semitism? Okay. Well, they were taught about Kristallnacht. Sorry, this was called Remembering Kristallnacht. And what I remember, I took a picture of this. I came and I didn't see one thing, which is what you just said, Julian, which is anti-Semitism. Not one student wrote, I will not be silent in the face of anti-Semitism. And I thought to myself, that is strange. It's a strange phenomenon where they went to hear about Kristallnacht, but they came out saying nothing about Kristallnacht. So what was actually, I wasn't there. What was in the classroom? What was said to elicit such responses? Now, I shared this with you today because in the year 2018-19, this was part of the problem of Holocaust education, is that it was universalization. And most students, when they heard about the Holocaust, they came out with these types of slogans. I want to switch gears and go a little bit more contemporary. This happened a year ago. So a Jewish family shared the following text with me. Just to give you a bit of context, there was a student in in Connecticut, I believe, 8th grader, who did a project on his roots, and he received a 0 by the teacher. The teacher gave him a 0. The family asked the teacher, Mrs. Gordon, why? I'm sorry, the teacher, they are the Gordon, right? They asked, why did our son receive a 0? This is her explanation. I want to read it out loud. Mrs. Gordon, thank you for your inquiry regarding, I can't say the name, regarding this student's grade. The project was for family customs related to ethnicity and roots. It is my understanding that your husband, Mr. Gordon, is from Russia. It is also my understanding you are from Asia, which is, by the way, strange geographically. Why was the project religious and political when he could have chosen Russia or Asia? To add, the kids in the class felt that he spoke often about being Jewish with excitement, but I'm not sure other parents would appreciate learning about the Wailing Wall or Jerusalem, as it doesn't relate to customs in your household. I could potentially add 10 points to the food section, because I've seen him eat at lunch with what appears to be like falafels, basically. I don't want to discredit, but the project has to be about their family and where they're from and the customs derived from the country. Because you are not from Israel, the directions were not followed. So the student is a young boy, and I'm from the former Soviet Union. And my mother always told me, we are from Judea. We Jews, we come from the land of Israel. We just happen to be in Russia because we were kicked out. But we are an ethnicity, we are a people, and we come from the land of Israel. And so, again, why am I bringing this up? Because teaching about anti-Semitism also means teaching about Jewish identity, right? The primary victims of anti-Semitism, well, there are many. There first is the Jews, and then there's everybody else after. You know the famous saying, first they came for the Jews and they came from everyone else, right? If we don't understand who the Jewish people are and their identity, you won't understand the attack on that identity, because anti-Zionism, which is today's form of anti-Semitism, is an attack on Jewish national character, much more than what it was during the era of anti-Semitism of Wilhelm Marr, which we are going to go into right now. So I'm just going to skip for the time, and I want to show you that in the year 2018, before I was a research fellow with ISGAP, I was a participant. I came to Oxford, and the program asked us to, I was at that time at UCLA, I was a lecturer, asked us to come up with a syllabus on anti-Semitism. This was my syllabus, The Anatomy of Anti-Semitism from Ancient to Modern. This is kind of what week by week. And I taught it, not at university, but in high schools. And what I want to start is with a case study. Now, I know, by the way, warning, a lot of these images are gruesome, violent in nature. Okay? I showed this to my students, Jewish students, by the way, in high school. And I asked them, is this anti-Semitism? And do you know what they said? They told me, no, this is not anti-Semitism. And I asked, why not? And they said, well, Dr. Lekht, while it is extreme and very violent, this does seem to be a criticism, a political criticism of the state of Israel. It's not criticizing Jews per se, it's criticizing the state. What are your thoughts? I'm actually asking everyone, what do you think about this, what they told me?
Well, I would think, I mean, I'm not Jewish, I'll put that right out there, but in understanding that Israel is a state for the Jewish people, if you're criticizing it politically, are you not also criticizing the religion of the people who make up the country? So that's interesting to me that they separated the two of them. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's a really good observation. I mean, that is exactly right. They separated. And in fact, I remember I even asked them, but isn't Israel a Jewish country? And they didn't know what to tell me. They were like, well, there was this silence in the room. To make a very long story short, that moment in the class was very difficult for me because surely I thought, how could anyone deny this? This is anti-Semitism. And here I am speaking to 12th graders at a modern Orthodox school in Los Angeles, and they're telling me this isn't anti-Semitism. And I remember thinking to myself that, excuse me, that this curriculum that I had created is not good enough. In fact, I told them about the 3D test. I told them about IRA. We started with all these working definitions of anti-Semitism, and yet, despite all of that, they couldn't see it. And so what this moment, this failure, and I like to call it a failure because it led me to recreate a different way to conceptualize teaching about anti-Semitism. I don't teach about anti-Semitism with definitions anymore. I teach in a different way. And so this is part of the talk now is where I'm actually going to go. This was more kind of scaffolding for you of how I got to this place now of how I teach. I want to begin by a quote by the famous Russian Jewish, Soviet Jewish journalist and writer Vasily Grossman, who wrote in his novel Life and Fate, which is a very important book, very long book, but very important if you are interested to fully understand the history of the Jewish people in the Soviet Union and more largely the history of anti-Semitism. He said, show me what you accuse the Jews of, and I will tell you what you are guilty of. Right? And that, I want to begin with that, and I want to telegraph that to you all today and return to that as we continue. What are the Jewish people accused of today? They're accused of power, genocide, colonialism and occupation, apartheid, ritualized murder of children, theft. This is the major accusation today. This was not the major accusation during the time of the Holocaust, by the way. We were not accused of being of stealing, of committing genocide, but power was still important. The Jews hold too much power. We'll go through that. Just a small side note on that particular claim of genocide. Bringing it to October 7th. October 7th, the massacre against Israelis happens on October 7th. IDF officially goes into Gaza on October 27th. But already on October 24th, at UC Santa Cruz in California, we have the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies Department calling for a walkout called The Genocide in Gaza in our classrooms, a Teaching Palestine workshop. So Israel had not even had a chance to go into Gaza, and we were already slapped with the libel. Right? Tell me what you accuse the Jews of. What was October 7th? What does Hamas want? And I shall tell you what you're guilty of. These images are difficult. I don't know if you know this woman, Shani Luke, was taken from the Nova Festival, paraded. Her body was paraded on a pickup truck. I'm sorry, I'm pausing because it's a little difficult, and Israel was called immediately a terrorist state. Well, what was October 7th? A terror attack, right? Again, bringing Vasily Grossman's quote back here. Today's language of anti-Semitism deals mostly with Israel, Zionism. Globalize the Intifada, kill the Zionists. Jews control the media and the banks. Jews are the ones who did 9/11. Dirty Jew, dirty Zionist. Jews are not wanted here. Zionists off campus. This is how similar it is to the German slogan. And so to launch us in now to go into history, I'd like to ask you, when do you think anti-Semitism or Jew hatred began? If somebody asked you, if you were being asked, when do you think, if you had to date it, the moment that this anti-Semitism starts?
Doesn't it start in the Roman times where the Romans kick all the Jewish people out of Rome even prior to Christianity, if I remember my ancient history at all?
Excuse me, you're talking about 70 AD with the expulsion of Jews from Judea and the destruction of the Second Temple.
All right, so I guess it is after Christianity, but I'm not really good at ancient history, but
Around that time.
yeah.
Okay, any other answers?
The day Judaism was created.
The day Judaism, what is that day? When was Judaism
Well,
created?
the Midrash says that there's a connection between Sinai and Sin'ah. The two words in Hebrew sound the same. Sinai means Sinai, the giving of the Torah. Sin'ah means hatred. So as soon as this people is born as a distinct group, they're already a target.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have brought this up, but since you have, I am going to say this. When the Jewish people at Har Sinai were called a nation, an Am Kadosh, right? Not just a holy people, but a separate people, because that's the root of Kuf Dalet Shin, a separate people. God prophesied that the Jews will always have an Amalek. It comes together, anti-Semitism and where there are Jews, there will always be anti-Semitism. So the goal is never, you can't eradicate anti-Semitism. We can manage it, but we won't be able to, which is interesting. And it's also very defeating. And I tell this to my students a lot because they say, why the Jews? Why do they hate us? How can we root it out? And I have to tell them, we can't root it out. We can't root it out, but we could do something even more powerful, which I'm going to return to at the very end. Now, the reason I asked, when did anti-Semitism begin, is to answer it by saying, this is the work of Robert Wistrich. And if you are in the field of understanding Holocaust history, literature, and anti-Semitism, you must know his work. He's a very important figure. And he deemed anti-Semitism the longest hatred. Now, I say this not because I want some sort of cookie points or brownie points. Oh, we're being hated the longest. No, rather, the reason I bring this to our attention is because it's such a durable hatred. It is the longest and has been able to shapeshift. That is the kind of the success of anti-Semitism, is it's that its ability to evolve. It is very durable and protein. And as such, I'd like to offer before you a model that I have created to understand the evolution of Jew hatred in 3 distinct eras: the era of anti-Judaism, the era of anti-Semitism, and the era of anti-Zionism. In the era of anti-Judaism, the Jew was cast, well, I should just say, in every era, the Jew is cast as a villain, an avatar that the society deems must be eradicated. And as such, for the anti-Semite, dealing with the Jews becomes a self-righteous moral act. That's very important to understand. All right, so in the era of anti-Judaism, the Jew was cast as violating the tenets of Christianity. We are called, we, the Jewish people, in the Torah, as a stubborn, stiff-necked people. We're very, very stubborn. When Christianity started to emerge, Jews did not get, quote unquote, on the salvation train. They resisted. We were kind of the guiding principles of Europe as Christianity was emerging. We were seen as an obstacle to Christianity. This culminated with the accusation of deicide, of course, which is the accusation that the Jews killed Christ. That's the culmination of anti-Judaism. So, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into anti-Judaism. As Europe evolves, and especially post-enlightened Europe, in the age of reason and rationale, Jew hatred evolves, and it is no longer anti-Judaism. It becomes anti-Semitism. Now the Jew is cast as a villain, violating the purity of race. Right? At one moment in time, in the 1880s and in the 1880s, 1890s, as race science was emerging, and we're going to talk about that with Darwin's theories, Jews were seen as a lower on the taxonomy classification of species. Well, Europe and the world has evolved again, and I call this kind of a 3.0 upgrade. You know, the iPhones, we've got the 1.0 version of the Jew hatred, 2.0, we're now in 3.0. Today, it is not fashionable to be an anti-Semite. Absolutely not. In fact, most of the people who themselves sometimes stand from the podium speaking lies about Jews in Israel will often start by saying, I would like to begin by saying that I abhor and detest anti-Semitism. I stand with the Jewish community. However, and then comes the libel against the Jewish people. So now the Jewish people, vis-a-vis Israel and Zionism, we are cast as a different villain, human rights. You see, interestingly enough, with this kind of model, what this model shows is what does society deem to be moral, right? Today, the most moral thing is human rights, right? Enshrined in the United Nations and the ICC and the ICJ, human rights. So what are Jews cast? They're cast as violators of the human rights. You know, when I was teaching this years ago, a high school student raised her hand and said to me, if we could predict what society would deem to be morally pure, let's say in 200 years, we could predict what anti-Semitism would look like. And that was a very, very astute observation, I thought, of hers. So let us go and talk a bit more about anti-Judaism. Anti-Judaism is rooted, as I say, in the accusation that Jews killed Christ. You've got a very important figure here, Saint Augustine, who turned against the Jews and focused on them as being the enemies of God. The interesting thing about the era of anti-Judaism is that it wasn't genocidal. You could still save yourself by converting, right? It wasn't rooted in genetics and race. So that's why you could still convert. So in other words, to save Europe from the Jews was to save them not from the Jewish people, but from the Jewish religion. Okay? Let me show you a little bit more deeper. So a text that I often use when teaching. Martin Luther, who also turned vehemently against the Jews. Notice a lot of the early Christian writers, they first befriend the Jews, but then realize the Jews are not going to come and agree, and they turn away very, very vehemently against the Jews. So he writes a book in 1543 called On the Jews and Their Lies. I'm just going to read an excerpt, and he calls them a brood of vipers. The Jews are a brood of vipers. Therefore, be on your guard against the Jews, knowing that wherever they have their synagogues, nothing is found but a den of devils. Right? Moreover, they are nothing but thieves and robbers. Now, I've boldened and underlined phrases that, as you see, are still going to be used and going to become part of the lexicon of anti-Semitism. Thus, we live from day to day together with wife and child they live from day to day together with wife and child by theft and robbery, right? So Jews they collaborate with the devil. Jews are vipers. They are thieves. They are robbers. They are not to be trusted. And interesting, how many of you are aware of ecclesia and synagoga? These are very important statues that were erected and created during the medieval era. If you go to Europe, especially England, more in the northern countries, but also in I believe in France as well, you'll find a pair of these sisters. They're called ecclesia and synagoga, church and synagogue. They're sisters. This is church and this is synagogue. Just to make our time go faster, I mean, usually I would ask students to kind of analyze what they see with me. But so she has a chalice in one hand and the cross in the other. She's wearing a crown. Her face is kind of turned and she's looking. Her eyes are open. Conversely, the synagogue, the Jew who's supposed to be the Jewish religion, if you see, she's blindfolded. I don't know if you can see that. She's blindfolded and she carries a lance. This lance symbolically is supposed to represent the lance that killed Christ when he was on the cross. Likewise, she's holding what seems to be a tablet or a Bible. But what's significant here is that she's blind. She cannot see the truth being the New Testimony, the truth being Christianity. But we need her. We still need her because she holds the Old Testament. So, and interestingly enough, the Christians, the early Christian fathers, they had a kind of they praised the Old Testament. They understood how important it was, but they turned against the Jewish people. It's a very interesting pair. Also, so just because we really don't have time to read all the excerpts, but I did read a lot of the book on the Jews and their lies. Excuse me. And this is the vocabulary from Martin Luther. Okay, serpent, Satan, wasp's nest, brood of vipers, they are blind and foolish. They are bloodthirsty. They live in the den of devils. They are cunning. They can poison the non-Jews. They are traitors. He makes a big kind of a big moment of the figure of Judas, who sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver and thus betrayed Christ. They are robbers and thieves. And this is actually a very interesting, one of the first extant examples of Jews and devils. This is from the 1300s from England. This was in a banker's notebook. This is a Jew, okay? And he's touching him. The Jew was often shown wearing this type of headgear, and this is the devil kind of identifying the Jew. It's a very interesting story about this. We could talk about it later, or if you want, email me after. I could send you some fascinating articles. So as you could see, it depicts Isaac of Norwich, who was a financier at the time. He's surrounded by figures, both Jews and non-Jews, but the devil kind of identifies him. And this is one of the, as I say, first extant pieces that we have in Europe that link Jews with devils, with demons. Okay, let's shift from anti-Judaism to the era of anti-Semitism. excuse me, in the era of anti-Semitism, you have to understand that the term anti-Semitism itself was coined rather not too long ago, really, around the 1880s, maybe late 1870s. So it's an interesting, actually, phenomenon, because if you recall, a few slides ago, I asked you all, when did anti-Semitism begin? Somebody said from the Roman times. Dr. Pilnik said from the times the Jews became a religion. And yet, the word for anti-Semitism was coined in the 1880s, and it was coined by a man named Wilhelm Marr. Here he is. Wilhelm Marr was a failed politician. He's not an interesting figure in terms of understanding German history, but it is an important figure of understanding the evolution of anti-Semitism. He coined this term, and I always ask my students, why would he do that, right? This is a cup. We all know it's a cup, but let's say we didn't have the word for it. So when he creates this word for it, he's a brilliant marketer. What he's actually doing is saying, look, I'm a man of progress. I'm a man of the Enlightenment. I do not cast the Jews as evil, as, consorting with the devil. These are backward and benighted concepts. No, the Jew poses a different threat to us all. It's a different threat. And in that way, he was able to market and peddle a progressive, and I'm using this term, I know, anachronistically, right? But intentionally. At that time, to be an anti-Semite it's almost a badge of honor. And he created these League of Anti-Semites, these little chapters where people would meet and discuss. Now, why do I talk about him? Why do I think he's important? If you recall the diagram of anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism, and I've told you many times people who are anti-Zionists will always eschew anti-Semitism. They'll say, we have nothing in common with those bigoted white supremacists who hate Jews based on their racial character. No. We have a different problem. It's the same phenomenon happening, but it happened in the 1880s. I want to read, I'll return to that slide in a minute. I want to read a short excerpts, give you from his pamphlet, where the essay called The Victory of Judaism over Germandom. This is the era, by the way, of rising nationalism. It's important to understand that Wilhelm Marr is concerned with the German character, with the purity of the German race and the nation, the German nation. I want to read this particular one right here. Yes, through the Jewish nation, Germany will become a world power, a Western new Palestine. Now that's an interesting thing. The term Palestine in the 1880s, I will just tell you this, meant Jewish. Everybody knew that. What he's basically saying is that the Jewish nation will transform Germany and make it into a Palestine, into a Jewish country. This anxiety over Jewish control. Dear reader, while you are allowing there to be skinned alive, I bow my head in admiration and amazement before this Semitic people which has us under our heel. There is no stopping them. Are there no clear signs that the twilight of the Jews is settling in? Jewry's control of society and politics is still in the prime of its development. Very similar to the folks of anti-Judaism who are concerned with the Jewish religion being an obstacle. This takes it to a whole other level in the era of nationalism and in the era of race science, is that the Jew is seen as posing a threat of taking over our country, our people. Now, I point this cartoon out from 2019 by the New York Times International Edition. It was then rescinded within a week. Whatever your feelings are, this is not about Trump. It's not even about that. But what is important here is what it reveals about the relationship between the two leaders. Now, Bibi Netanyahu is rendered as a dog who's leading the blind US president. Who is really in control? Who is really in control here, right? Who is going to transform our United States into Israel? But it's even more insidious than that. If you really look closely, the US president is wearing a Jewish hat. This Jewish dog has already bewitched the non-Jewish world and transformed the non-Jewish world. That's the anxiety that stems from Wilhelm Marr, from the era of anti-Semitism. More people, this is Karl Dühring, a Jewish question would still exist, even if every Jew were to turn his back on his religion and join one of our major churches. So you see, you can't even save yourself by a conversion in the era of anti-Semitism, because it's racial. Dostoevsky also, wrote about Jews. He wrote an essay called The Jews Oppressed or Oppressor, interestingly enough, very germane language to us today, but basically also revealing similar anxieties that Russia was under the heel of the Jews who are going to take over Russia. So if we compare the two eras, the era of anti-Judaism sees the Jews as devilish, cunning traitors. In the era of anti-Semitism, we are seen as wily and cunning. We are seen as, these are, like, interestingly enough, begin to emerge. We are the anxiety over the fact that we are going to control. And so, unlike in the era of anti-Semitism, where a Jew could save him or herself, in the era of anti-Semitism, the answer to the Jewish question, and it was answered by the Nazis with the final solution, that you have to annihilate the Jewish race. That's the answer to the Jewish question in the 19th and later 20th century. The answer to the Jewish question in the era of anti-Judaism was conversion. And so now we come to the era of anti-Zionism and how this hatred has evolved and mutated. But there are still core components that haven't changed. We are cast in the role of the villain, right? In these three eras. If you recall, when I started, I explained to you the problems that I found teaching about anti-Semitism was that either there wasn't a robust curriculum, either it was all focused on the Holocaust, or there were definitions. And I decided I'm going to not, and I didn't with you guys today. I told you about IRA, but I didn't actually start with the definition. I'd like to say that my pedagogical approach is informed by the great Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He wrote an essay, and I'm more than happy to send readings over afterwards. And in this essay, he said that anti-Semitism is a virus. He said that anti-Semitism is a virus because of its nature to evolve. And not only does it evolves in such a way as to take the shape and form, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it. And it sometimes is dressed in the language that we care mostly about, right? Human rights language, social justice language. In every era, it's dressed in the language that the era cares most about. So I thought to myself, if anti-Semitism is a virus, what would its nucleotide sequence be? What would its DNA core be? And so in my understanding of anti-Semitism, what I have come up to is the 6 accusations or tropes. And so what's great about teaching it this way is that it doesn't even matter if we're in the 14th century or the 19th century or in the 21st century. It doesn't even matter if we call it anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, or anti-Zionism. The tropes pretty much stay the same. There is a core to the DNA of this virus. I'm going to take us through all 6 really quickly. The first is blood libel. The accusation stems from England from the 12th century with the death of a boy named William of Norwich. He was killed, it's true. He was crucified and his blood was drained. Years later, a monk traveling through the town of Norwich heard the story. There was a lot of tension between the Jews and the Christians, mostly due to the Crusades, and they were financing the Crusades, the Jews, because they were put in the position, excuse me, of money lenders. And so the accusation was created that the Jews actually ensnared this non-Jewish boy this pure Christian boy. They killed him and they used his blood for ritual purposes. And it spread like, before things became viral, the Jews were, the target of all the viral hate. It spread very quickly, and it was called blood libel. It's the accusation that Jews are bloodthirsty. And notice it's always with children, because it goes back to William of Norwich. Okay, these are just some examples because I'm trying to show you it doesn't matter what era we live in. This is Simon of Trent in Italy from the 14th century. Shown these are Jews, and the reason they're Jews is they're wearing yellow amulets right here. And you see that little hat? Do you remember that little hat from that little sketch? These are Jews. They're killing a saint, draining his blood. This is William of Norwich. This is from an UNRWA textbook. UNRWA is a UN agency within the United Nations. It's responsible for helping Palestinian Arab refugees, but also it publishes educational material. This is in a textbook for Arab children. The Hasidic Jew is killing, a non-Jewish child. This is from Jordan. Right after October 7th, they published a cartoon. They published a cartoon with an Israeli general eating a little child. Now, a lot of people could challenge me and say, okay, but Dr. Lekht, you can't deny that as a result of the conflict between Israel and the Arab world, children die. Absolutely. But here's the thing. Think about Putin and Ukraine. Putin will never be shown in this way. Putin will never be rendered eating children. That's the difference. It's the blood libel. That's the unique to the core of that DNA. The New York Times also ran this story. This is before October 7th. This is from 2021. If you recall, the other conflict between Gaza was a major conflict. Most of these kids were actually killed by Hamas rockets that were misfired in their own territory. But it doesn't matter because the lie was already put out there that, Jews are bloodthirsty. Okay? This accusation of blood libel, I just want to show you, if you are a teacher, I teach English literature as well. This is from Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. In the Canterbury Tales, there is the Prioress's Tale. And the tale is about a little boy who gets tricked by Jews. They kill him. They drain his blood. Notice the wasp's nest, that language, the lexicon coming back. These are some of the most vivid examples in history of the blood libel. We've got England, Italy. We have the Damascus affair. It came into the Arab world in the 1840s, and in the Russian Empire, excuse me, in Kiev in 1913. Again, a non-Jewish boy was killed and a Jewish man, Bayless, his name was Bayless, was blamed. Contemporary blood libel. This idea that Israel is out to kill. A lot of students, if you talk to them, both in high schools right now and colleges, Jewish, and you ask them, what are you told? A common one that they will tell you is that we are baby killers. If you're a Jew, you are accused of being baby killers. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the doctor's plot right now, but it's interesting to reconceptualize this as also part of the story of blood libel. Here are some, again, Ariel Sharon eating Palestinian children, Bibi Netanyahu. It's not to say that Israel can never be criticized. That's not the point. The point is, when does this criticism dip into anti-Semitism? Well, blood libel is one of them. And you see, my students who were unable to identify that this was anti-Semitism didn't know about blood libel. They didn't know. The second nucleotide sequence into that core DNA is this idea that Jews control the world. This comes from Russia in 1903 from something known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Very interesting document. By the way, I've read it. It's very convoluted, very difficult. But in essence, what the Russian Empire devised. It's a forged document. They said that, oh my God, we found this secret book written by the cabal of Jews, and they're planning to take over the world. And it's like a minute by minute meeting notes. Of course, it was written by the Tsar, not the Tsar, but Tsar had it commissioned. But it doesn't matter because that accusation has been kind of just like blood libel, it went viral. And I kind of group world domination and Jewish power together with this because of the because today power is seen in the world, in the post-colonial world, language of colonization. And so Jews are being cast as colonizers, thereby being in the role of powerful. This is the protocols of the elders of Zion. We spoke about it. Notice the snake. Remember the brood of vipers? Interestingly enough, the snake comes back. This is another, this document. I mean, we don't have time to go really in depth into all, but this is kind of how it looks. They have protocol number 1, number 2. These are notes. Excuse me. This is the snake. This is the copy of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion from the Arab world. Notice that snake again. Notice, remember Martin Luther, the Jews, and the brood of vipers. I do treat this idea of Palestine being colonized as a kind of mutation on world domination, now recast in language of colonialism. Do you see the snake here as well? Again, that snake comes back with the Jews' brood of vipers. Also, the Soviets used it in their propaganda cartoons against Israel in the 60s.
Doctor, didn't Henry Ford also give a copy of the Elders of Zion free to anybody who bought a Ford vehicle?
Well, look, he owned the Dearborn, the Michigan Dearborn, and he translated the entire Protocols of the Elders into English and used his newspaper to basically educate the English population. Absolutely. Yep. The third in that sequence, in that DNA sequence, is demonization. The Jews, remember, Jews cast as living with the devils, with the demons. Now, you see, now, you might be wondering, why did I bring up all these pictures of Israel and apartheid and Palestine and Nazis? Because I think that in the 21st century, rational people don't believe that there are devils. But if you ask rational people, what is evil? They will tell you that apartheid is evil, that racism is evil, and that Nazism is evil, as they should. But that's a demonization. That's today's devil. Ilhan Omar, representative, U.S. House from Minnesota, tweeted years ago, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Just substitute, I tell my students all the time, if you're not sure, substitute Israel with Jews. The Jews have hypnotized the world. And you are right back in Wilhelm Marr's book. Right? And this, I want to pause and say why I also find it dangerous to conflate racism and anti-Semitism. Racism is belief that one race is subhuman. Anti-Semitism believes that the Jews are both subhuman and superhuman. They have the power to control and hypnotize. More pictures of Israel as devils. Dual loyalty. That's number 4. Dual loyalty is the accusation that Jews are not loyal. Remember, it comes even from anti-Judaism, from Martin Luther's work, Betrayal of Judas, right? The Jews are formed their own people. But when we're talking about in the era of anti-Semitism and the Jewish question, when the Jewish people were emancipated in France in the 1800s, Count de Tonnerre famously said, give everything to the Jews as individuals, give nothing to the Jews as a nation. And that's important. That's important because in that way, what did he reveal? That the Jewish people are a nation. And he's right. He's not wrong, Count de Tonnerre. And so wherever Jews go, people see them as being not trustworthy fully. These are just 2 cases, one from UCLA in 2014, One from a student who wanted to cover the, if you recall, a few years ago, there was a shooting in Texas at a synagogue, and she was the editor-in-chief of her high school newspaper and wanted to cover the event. She was the editor-in-chief, and her high school teacher, who was the academic advisor, said, "You've been publishing too much about anti-Semitism. In fact, when in positions of power, Jews further their own agendas. You can't write about anti-Semitism too much." More on dual loyalty. Now, this one is racism, really, dehumanization. This is the era of the Holocaust. And this is why I think it's so dangerous to only focus on the Holocaust as emblematic of anti-Semitism, because Jews were not labeled in the same way that they are labeled today. Was there dehumanization? Yes. Was there concern that the Jew would take over, the anxiety? Yes. But the Jew was cast as subhuman, not superhuman. And this is from Soviet Union. This says in Russian, "Sionizm ruzhyo imperializma," which translates to Zionism is the weapon of imperialism. And notice how Zionism and Jews are cast as a spider, Jewish spider. This is from Palestinian Media Watch. If you see, the rat has a Jewish Magen David, a Star of David. Excuse me. And the sixth, final core to that DNA is this idea that Jews are greedy. It's all about the Benjamins. This goes to two, I would say, seminal events in history. One, the Judas sold Christ for 30 pieces of silver. And two, this one is, I think, more important. In England, Jews were forced into the position of moneylenders. In many ways, Jews financed the Crusades, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. And so, interestingly enough, to return to our diagram where we reimagine Jew hatred through these three eras of anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism, what I also found, and by the way, I could be wrong, I'm still thinking this through, that these tropes, these six accusations, sometimes some recede and some come more to the fore. So for instance, in the era of anti-Judaism, demonization and blood libel were very strong. But in the era of anti-Semitism, it seemed that blood libel had receded. What had come to the fore was dual loyalty, dehumanization, and world domination. Sorry if they got cut off. And in our era, interestingly enough, the things that I think have come back from the era of anti-Judaism is blood libel, demonization, and this obsession with Jews, with Israel being either colonizers or Jews in the diaspora being white and privileged and having power. Excuse me for the expletives here. This is a little experiment I'm going to do with all of you, if you allow me. These are tweets, real tweets, that I have just copied and pasted. These are from the year, this is long, this is dated. This is from the year 2019. I'm going to just let you sit with it and take a look at it. And I want you to tell me if you think these are anti-Semitic tweets. Do you believe these are anti-Semitic tweets? If you could just yes or no, you do. Okay. Well, because you've allowed me to be in your thought experiment, or rather in this thought experiment, these are not the actual tweets. I mean, they are tweets, but none of them say any of these words. Do you know what they say instead? That's what they say. Now, why did I bring this up? Because anti-Semitism evolves. Because the language used by anti-Semites evolves. Because Wilhelm Marr understood he wouldn't be able to peddle anti-Semitism in the form of anti-Judaism. And many times he spoke about Semites, not Jews. Today, they say Zionist, not Jew. They're now already saying Jew also. But that's critical in our understanding. I mean, if you get anything out of this session today, one thing I want you to really walk away with is the idea that one of the most complicated things about this form of hatred is that it's so wily, it's a shapeshifter. But if you know the core core kind of DNA, you would be able to detect it. Coming to the end right now, these are some slogans that have proliferated. I mean, I've seen them before, but really post October 7th, right? Final solution. Final solution was used by the Germans in Wannsee. Final solution meant extermination of Jews. Because anti-Semites often talk in euphemisms. And that's important for our students to understand. Because just not too long ago, I was teaching a class on the Arab-Israeli conflict, and a student asked me why, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, can be considered anti-Semitic. And I explained to the student that many times bad faith actors don't speak, they speak in euphemisms. Right? Final solution is a euphemism for the extermination of the Jews. This was recently, I believe this was, I don't recall which university, so I don't recall right now, but this was after October 7th. Here's a man walking with a slogan that says final solution. The reason that it's so important to focus on these accusations is because they have consequences. When you label a people and say that they are out for blood, or they want to control you, or that they are demonic, or that they cannot be, that they have their loyalties lie elsewhere, or that they may be subhuman, or they're so greedy, there are consequences. In fact, you are labeling these people as evil, untrustworthy, and illegitimate. And I always ask, what do you do with the people that are evil, untrustworthy, and illegitimate? I mean, if you knew that on this planet, if you actually knew that on this planet Earth, there are people who kill children, there are people who will sell you, who want to control everyone, the only answer is you have to deny their right. I mean, that's the only answer here. Hannah Arendt, also an important person if you are studying the Holocaust, an important philosopher, thinker. Though she got, in my opinion, many things wrong, one thing she did have to say about anti-Semitism is that anti-Semitism is of a different nature, in the sense that the anti-Semite doesn't merely want to colonize the Jew, enslave the Jew, and banish the Jew. The anti-Semite wants to exterminate the Jew. You have to. That's why it becomes a moral imperative. And that's why I believe that we have shifted from the Jewish question to the Israel question. With the Jewish question, it was answered in Auschwitz and elsewhere, in Ponari, in Babi Yar, in Treblinka. And today, the Israel question is, what do we do with this country, these people that are violating human rights? Well, I'm not going to answer the question. You understand my pointing this aside. And so this is from the Nazi era, the eternal Jew, a poster, really ugly, disgusting, right? UNHRC condemnations at the United Nations. Israel has the highest amount. I mean, what do you do with a country that the UN deems to have the most moral opprobrium? And the kangaroo courts right now with the ICC and the ICJ. I'm more than happy to, I know some of you are taking, it's fine to take pictures. I'm more than happy to share this slide deck. I share it all the time. And so there's only one solution, Intifada revolution. I know it's a radical thing to say, but it's a very dangerous, dangerous slogan. As dangerous, there is only one solution, the final solution. And I want to conclude by returning to the question of why do we, that show me what you accuse the Jews of, and I'll tell you what you are guilty of. These accusations in the form of these tropes, blood libel, theft, power, dual loyalty, they actually provide a moral permission slip for the anti-Semite to do away and to do to the Jew what they accuse the Jews of doing. It's a permission slip. So in casting the Jew as the villain, the anti-Semite believes that he or she is fighting evil. And in this way, anti-Semitism becomes an act of righteousness. This is a screenshot from a rally in London about 3 months ago. Keep the world clean. How is that any different from the Nazi era? Keep Germany clean. Eradicate the Jew. That is anti-Semitism. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and invite you all into a conversation and any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Lekht, if I may.
Thank
You
you.
don't have to turn on your cameras, only if you want to, but thank you. This was a powerful and timely and enlightening, eye-opening presentation. Thank you.
I genuinely, look, people say to me, oh, you're against Holocaust education. Absolutely. I wrote my dissertation on Holocaust education, on the Holocaust. But I worry that by teaching anti-Semitism and the Holocaust together, we have put a timestamp on it and are not understanding that it can evolve. We absolutely must teach of the Holocaust, absolutely, but as part of the history of anti-Semitism.
I have a question for you. I found this fascinating and so informative. Anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and with anti-Zionism and the way it's couched, the way it's presented, you see Jewish people also becoming part of a group that sort of is pushing back against this. Maybe if they took a step back and realized that what they're actually engaging in themselves, although they don't recognize it for what it is Jew hatred. And how would you suggest talking to students who are pushing back about the situation in the Middle East
Excuse me.
with the human rights issue and all?
Jill, from what you're asking me is how do we approach Jewish people who side with anti-Zionists, who are, is that the,
Yes, because they may not think of it as the terms, you know, we talk about anti-Judaism and how it's evolved, and then to anti-Semitism, no longer is it religious, it's about the racial component. And now today, anti-Zionism, I don't understand it myself, but there are Jewish people that are marching with, people that are, saying from the river to the sea.
Yep. I want to say
they don't see that as anti-Jew?
Okay. First of all, I'm going to answer your question, but I want to take 2 steps back and tell you that the phenomenon of anti-Semitic Jews who can be anti-Semitic or contribute to anti-Semitism is not new at all. I will offer a few examples from my knowledge of Soviet history. In the Soviet Union, there was a committee known as Yevsekция. You smile, Dr. Pilnik, you know. It was the Jewish section of the Communist Party. They formed, and they attacked Jews on the streets, effectively. They would approach Jews who were still wearing their kippot, Jewish head coverings. They would approach rabbis and smear pig lard on their beards because they were like, you have to be, they wanted the Jews to modernize and join the revolution, but they were being anti-Semitic. Okay, so that this idea that a Jew cannot contribute to anti-Semitism, we must dispense with that. The other thing that I want to tell you, and this is my own perspective, from my understanding, something that I deeply care about is Jewish education of our youth. I come from the former Soviet Union. One thing Soviet Jews understand that American Jews do not, and if you are an American Jew and do understand it, I'm not making a blank statement about all American Jews, is that Judaism is not just a religion, it's an ethnicity. And that is key. Most of the people who are marching, the Jewish people, see themselves not as part of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. They were taught in schools that Judaism is a religion. Now, they were also taught that Judaism is tikkun olam. Does everybody know what that means? Yes?
Explain.
Tikkun olam means repair the world. It's a beautiful concept. It actually comes from one of the prayers in Judaism, the Aleinu prayer, said daily. And it's the notion that the world is broken and that it is up to the Jewish people to fix and repair the world. Like, huge responsibility, but also a very beautiful concept. Now, what a lot of students, myself, I went to a Jewish day school growing up. I was taught that tikkun olam meant to fight for the underdog, meant to fight for the persecuted and for the oppressed. Okay? You can see how a Jewish person easily will now march with the Palestinian cause because they have done such an amazing job telling the world that they are oppressed. And so it's not their it's upsetting, but they have been miseducated. I'll tell you another thing. Also, growing up in my synagogue, there was a phrase, tzedek tzedek tirdof, which means justice, justice shall you pursue. It was until until I was 22 years old, I didn't realize that it comes from a very large sentence. But what the Jewish educators did is they chopped it. And they said Judaism is about pursuing justice. But if you read the entire tractate of that sentence, it's justice, justice shall you pursue in the land that I, Adonai, have given to you. It comes from the Torah at a part where the Jewish people are returning to be sovereigns. And he's teaching them, God, telling them, you are now going to have to learn what it means to be a just sovereign. It's about ruling the land of Israel. But nobody taught me that when I was growing up. I was taught that Judaism means justice. So you could see how easily a Jewish youth would gravitate towards just causes for justice because they think that is how they express their Judaism. In fact, when I talk to these youth, they tell me this is my most earnest and my most authentic way of being a Jew. I am a Jew. And that's why I said they were, the group, if not now, comes from the Hillel tractate. If not now, then when? If not who, then if not us, then who? So they take piecemeal from Jewish texts, and they take it, and they don't fully understand the entire context of the Tikkun Olam. If you look at it from a religious halachic perspective, halacha means Jewish law. To practice Tikkun Olam is to practice the mitzvot, the commandments. It is not to stand and rally on a corner of 56th and 7th Avenue, where I'm in New York, or, Wilshire and Santa Monica, wherever that's not but they have been taught that. It's on us educators. It's incumbent upon us. I have a big job to do when I'm with my students in reorienting them to understand that they are not just a religious group. They are part of a people. And so they miss that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because the attack of anti-Zionism is not a religious attack per se. It's an attack on national origin. Did that answer your question a bit?
Yes, but I do understand that it is complex.
Very.
Dr. Lekht, we will take 5 more minutes for questions. Maybe I can make a comment. We're really trying to make anti-Semitism timely. I want to make another timely comment. Free Palestine, and what about free Syria? How about making Syria free? What a wonderful idea after 53 years of dictatorship to have all the people of Syria free, all the ethnic groups there free, free citizens enjoying all the privileges of liberal society. I don't have a crystal ball, but I believe the next step is going to be a bloodbath more than a liberal democracy. Meaning that sometimes the people who rally for the slogans, they present a form of idealism that what's lurking behind is violence. In other words, the intentions are good. Only children are allowed to be naive without consequences. When adults are naive, the consequences can be horrendous.
Absolutely. Yeah. Free Syria, that's for sure.
I say that as an Israeli because I think that the overwhelming majority of Israelis do wish for the Palestinians what we wish upon ourselves, that we will be free and educated and live a happy life. The reality seems oppressive because of violence, not because um, not because of ill intention of the majority of Israelis. And in this conflict, I'm not saying that both sides one side is guilt-free, but if you look at the history of the conflict, the Palestinians had so many opportunities to get a much better outcome. My 2 cents. I'm sorry for interjecting.
Okay.
So I said 5 more minutes, and my minute wouldn't count. We'll take 5 minutes from now. Any other questions?
I just following what Dr. Punig just said, I have a question because the anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist phraseology is so effective in their messaging, in the short phraseology and rallies. And we are talking about such a detailed and broad approach to education. There's just no way to get our message across in an easier fashion unless you have ideas along those lines.
I have to tell you that it's true. I'm bemoaning together with you that we have done. I've said this for a long time. We have done such a terrible job. You know, look, I tried to curb my enthusiasm today because I have so much that I want to say. But when I was in college, I went to Jewish professionals on campus, and I would say that, like, this is what's happening is absolutely horrendous. This is an attack on our identity. And they looked at me like I was speaking in a different language. They didn't take me seriously. Moreover, I was like demonized and isolated. They said that anti-Zionism is just a political disagreement. Nobody, until it took October 7th. It took October 7th for Jews in the diaspora to understand that anti-Zionism is real. So do we have great slogans? No. Are we on the defensive position? Yes. So I teach the Arab-Israeli conflict right now in high school to both Jewish and non-Jewish kids. And I try to stay away from sloganism because I want them to have like a deep understanding. But sometimes, I have a computer, you can't see it, but I have a sticker on my computer. And my sticker, I made it myself, says, "We're here, deal with it." Meaning, you have a problem with Israel, it's your problem. We're here, it exists. The Jewish people are here. I'm done explaining, well, we have an international right to exist. Well, we're the real indigenous people. Well, if you look at San Remo conference, well, if you look at the UN partition plan, I'm personally done hasbaraing. Hasbara in Hebrew means explaining. Lasbir, to explain. I'm not going to explain, but I'm going to invest as much as I can in the youth to educate them. That's what I've decided to do. I unfortunately don't have a great answer for you. But you're right. We don't have great slogans. I don't know what to tell you.
Your answer is helpful. Thank you.
One more question. Thank you, Andrew.
May I ask the question? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So, thank you, Doctor. That was really fascinating and enlightening. My question to you is there a risk, in your opinion, of actually teaching these students the tropes so that you're re-emphasizing or trying, not disproving the point, but rather proving the point in some way, shape, or form? But can it have a reverse sort of ricochet backfire effect in any way?
This is not the first. So no, your question has been asked many times. People are concerned. They're like, well, what if you're actually inadvertently reinforcing the tropes that you're actually teaching? And that's where you have to be a very good and trained educator. if you treat anti-Semitism as pathology, right? It's a virus, it's a pathology. Would you tell a cardiologist, don't tell us about all the bad foods or all the, you have to teach people. You have to teach it in the right way. From my experience, all my years teaching, I have yet to encounter where teaching this actually creates the problem. I personally have not. But if it is a pathology, the pathology must be treated by talking about it, but the person talking, the educator, must be very well versed and understand this phenomenon and not stand there and say, okay, guys, anti-Semitism is a form of intolerance and bigotry and it's scapegoating. Then we're in trouble.
Okay. Dr. Lekht, or if I may, Naya, thank you so much. I want to give you another round of applause. For our program, this is so important, and I think as educators in the field of Holocaust education, we sometimes feel very isolated, and we feel pushed because the center has attracted people who I think are, for the most part, everyone is a unique page, but I think for the most part, we are on the same page with you. And we do see that in the world of Holocaust education, sometimes every single oppression gets covered except for the oppression of the Jews. I've had numerous conversations about it with my students, and that's actually what led me to suggest that you join us today. So thank you. We learned so much. To be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. By the way, mark your calendars for December 29th. We're going to have another